Welcome to Faith, Frauds, and Falsehoods. Every month, we take a deep dive into the history, social issues, and theology of a different cult. From the infamous to the lesser known, we examine how these groups operate, why people are drawn to them, and how they differ from true Christian teachings.
Through careful research and analysis, we aim to shed light on the complex and often controversial world of cults, and to provide insight into the unique challenges they pose to individuals, families, and society as a whole. So whether you're a curious bystander, a former member, or simply interested in the intersection of religion and culture, we invite you to join us on this journey of discovery and understanding.
And don't forget, while you're here, to like and comment and subscribe to stay up to date to our latest content. And as always, we thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration of faith, frauds, and falsehoods.
Before we get started, let us be clear. The opinions that we present are ours alone and do not represent the views or opinions of our respective churches or employers. Now let's begin.
All right, that does it. So we're here. We're back. This is episode 2 of the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, where we get to talk about the things that they teach.
The FLDS.
The FLDS. Normally, right, we're talking about a cult that we have to say what they taught. But these guys are still technically around. So these are things that they're actively teaching.
Well, when we left it in history, their current prophet, their leader, was in prison and still running the cult. And that's where he is today.
Yeah, I was sitting here reading his book when you jumped on this call. So it's still going. I don't know if we could even say that it's surviving, right? I think it's going the way of the dodo, just one person at a time.
Well, I know a lot of people have defected and left the cult. And also, the last I heard, he had prohibited any reproduction. So that couldn't happen. He wouldn't even let husbands and wives hug anymore. They're only allowed to quickly shake hands. Mothers and children also are not allowed to hug. But there's less and less children as time go along because there's no new children being born into the FLDS.
Yep,
I don't believe there's anybody converting into it. It was very rare for that in the first place.
Right.
It happened back in the day, but later on it really wasn't happening because you kind of got to be born into it.
Right. Yeah, it sounds to me kind of like he has started to give up and say, I'm not ever going to get out of jail, so we're just going to let it die. Let me be the last.
Yes.
Instead of passing the torch and letting someone else do it.
But as we mentioned before, the FLDS are not the only fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. They go by this name. There are other fundamentalist Latter-day Saints who are led by different prophets. And we'll probably talk about them as we go on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, we had talked a little bit about following this path for a little bit and seeing where it leads.
Because the FLDS is a cult that was born from a cult, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. Where are we going to start talking about their teachings?
So, I've got 5 really high points that I wrote down. And I was telling you just a minute ago that I could take one of these and probably talk for an hour and a half, right? So we're going to just...
buddy.
I know. We're not going to do that. Not tonight. We'll go to lunch one day and talk about one of these.
That's a plan.
But there we go. So I want to focus on just 3 things. If we can get to the other 2 in our 30-minute timeline, then great. But if not, it's okay. They're not key to the FLDS, right? There are things that are going to come up in the other groups that we talk about, and eventually, if and when we talk about the LDS, there are things that are going to come up there too. So,
and y'all should know, y'all notice that part of the way this show works is that Brian and I are friends, but we look at things differently and we approach things differently. He is concerned about the 30 minutes. As most of y'all know, I have no concern whatsoever about this show being 30 minutes. Although I think it was my idea to be shorter.
It was. It was very much your idea when we moved over to YouTube to say, we need these to be shorter episodes so that people are more likely to keep watching. Yep.
Yeah.
Because if y'all go back and listen to our first episode on Tony Alamo, it was like 3.5 hours long. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, and then Jim
Wow.
Jones was just as long, and I think the CSA was about 2.5 hours long, and then we decided we were going to cut them into pieces because it was just too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning there. Here, what's this first point here? I'll let you.
Let's start with the FLDS and really the LDS and the other branches of the fundamentalist
Because we can't talk
portion.
about the FLDS without starting with the LDS, where they came from.
Right. We're gonna try to avoid that, right? Because our goal is to kind of work backwards, but there's gonna be some things. There's this belief in the prophetic calling of the leader. So if you look back throughout the Old Testament and even into the New, right, we see the prophets of God that are kind of set apart. Isaiah has the great temple experience. Jeremiah, right, he's picked up literally by the hand of God and is told that he's special. Paul walking on his way to Damascus. No, where was Paul headed? My brain just completely gave up. Anyway, because I wanted to say on the road to Emmaus because we're walking into Holy Week, and I just yeah.
Oh, see, my brain went other places. I thought Amadeus, but when you said that, but actually, when you talk about prophetic calling, not so much the initial calling, but I think of Elijah.
Yeah,
Elijah, sleeping, and God bringing an angel to him and waking him up. That wasn't when he was called. Was that Samuel?
That was
Samuel, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I always think about that because I always think about what if an angel woke me up?
Right.
I've never seen an angel, and I don't really want to talk to an angel, honestly.
I
mean, I don't hate angels or something, but it's terrifying, exactly. And think about what Paul didn't know who it was at first.
Right.
But he immediately said, Lord, Lord.
Yeah, maybe.
He was fearful.
He did say, "Who are you, Lord?" But
yes,
anyway,
that's my point.
The point though is that the FLDS, right, has this idea that the leader is continuing in this pattern, right, and they are specifically chosen by God to be the one person that is the mouthpiece of God to his followers.
Yes, and this came from the prophet Joseph Smith.
Right.
From the LDS.
Sort of, right? So, yes, Joseph Smith started with this one man, one person kind of thing. Then the LDS kind of went into more of a presbytery eldership type of setup. And the FLDS, when they broke away, continued that eldership until Johnson said, no more, right? And we talked about that last week, right? He basically booted everybody out, right? So as a couple of them died, he didn't replace them, right? He didn't replace them, and then kicked out the rest of them and reinstituted this one-man doctrine, this one person who speaks for God as the key holder of God's authority on the earth.
Right. They don't believe they believe individuals can talk to God, but individuals don't receive a revelation only through the prophet. When the prophet speaks, the prophet is God speaking.
Which is, when we get to the LDS, there's a little bit of contradiction there. Big surprise that a cult has contradictions in it. But a big part of the salvation experience of LDS members and most likely FLDS is that sudden revelation within yourself of the truth, right? So it is still a revelation to you, but it's not the same kind of revelation, right? The prophets that are in leadership of the FLDS in particular are more like John the Revelator than someone who just receives from the Holy Spirit guidance, right?
Well, and their prophet goes as far as to salvation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Take
yeah,
it away and give it back, and kind of
right,
back and forth, which
right, because
Warren Jeffs is real well known for.
right, they're considered the key holder, right? You know, if you go back and look at Jesus's words that he's given the keys um, to the apostles, right? Whatever's bound in heaven is bound in heaven. Whatever's loosed on earth is loosed in heaven. Um, right? It's kind of that mentality, right? And it's taken to the extreme, much further than what the church has taught for the last 2,000 years. Um, you know, and his specific revelations, right? Oftentimes come in a book that's 800 pages long, right? And it's just gobbledygook, for lack of a better word. I was reading it, and I don't know if, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but you know me, right? I don't know if Warren Jeffs is just illiterate or has no idea how to write, right? Because there's zero grammar, right, at all. Um, and I, it's just bad. It's bad writing to begin with. Um, and it either makes someone believe or it makes someone laugh, right? And by that, you know, you think about if someone were to be suddenly receiving revelation from Jesus and scribbling as fast as they could, you could see, you know, mistakes, right? So you could make that argument and be like, you know, it was all coming so fast I couldn't keep up with it, and I didn't want to go back and edit my words in case I edited it wrong. Like, you
Now,
could make
this
that
is the
argument.
famous
I don't think
book
that's
that
what he's
he had
doing.
printed and
Right.
sent to the prosecutors, the judge,
Yep.
the police, everybody. His book, he spent $2 million and had
Mm-hmm.
distributed to all these people, thinking that they would convert and believe in him or something and let him go.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these are all revelations that came out. When was he convicted again?
Like 2006,
Yeah,
2008.
something like that.
Yeah.
So these are not recent revelations. He's been making more
Right.
and more of these revelations up until very recently. He commonly writes letters from jail with more, and he makes personal revelations to individual people as well. This is the Jesus Christ, which he refers to himself as for,
right.
to, you know, Bob Neely, or I made up that name, you know. He does that with his followers, individually revelations to them.
Right.
I totally made up that name. I know that's a real person now that I think about it, but
yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that I know someone named Bob Neely. But anyway, so, but every person in this group, right, is expected to submit their will to the will of the leader. In this case, at the moment, it's Warren Jeffs. Right before that,
which is a very common cult
Rulon.
thing. We've seen that in other cults, whether it was give up your ego, man, or, you know, follow me.
Right. Which, you know, sometimes it's been, you know, like Manson, right? A lot of Manson was, I'm going to force you to follow me, right? I'm going to manipulate you and make you do what I want, right?
Right. He was the ego one. He's like, give up your ego and submit.
Right.
You know?
Jim Jones was pretty similar, more manipulative and less about the, I say less about the force. There at a point it became all about the force. But this guy, he's doing it through fear. Right? He's teaching these people from birth, right, that he controls their salvation.
Yes. And he actively will take away to punish them.
I was reading an article as I was kind of getting ready for this, and the author talked about a 15-year-old kid, right, who had left the cult, had said, "I'm done," right, and separated himself or was separated, however that process works for them. Um, and right before the Boston Marathon bombing, right, if you remember that,
I
and
do.
just previously, right, Jeffs had prophesied that there would be blood in the streets and all of this um, death and torment and fear going throughout the U.S. Right before his release and subsequent return of Christ, right? And this kid was absolutely terrified because at that moment he thought, I walked away from salvation and it's fixing to happen and I'm doomed, right? That's psychological torture. That is
Mm-hmm.
horrible. And that's how this guy controls these people.
I seen a story of a 14-year-old that is actually one of his sons, one of his many, many sons, that he called up one day from prison
Mm-hmm.
that he was a sinner, an unrepentant sinner, and he was out. So he's losing his. Send him away. He's 14. Send him to go on roofs um, with some other FLDS members, but he's no longer a member, so they're no longer to talk to him.
Mm.
And he was supposed to still work and give his money to the church. And he was in a room all by himself. His mama was allowed to call him that she'd never be able to speak to him again. He's 14 years old. He tried to kill
Right.
himself.
Mm-hmm.
He thought he was done. It was over. There's no reason to live.
Right.
At this part, his mama later left the group and out too. But she called her son a second time, and he thought he would never hear. But he went a year.
Right.
That his whole mother told him she wouldn't talk to him. His father told him he's lost his salvation. You know,
That's
he
yeah.
used to not
That's
having a relationship with his father, who was the prophet, but he wasn't
right.
used to not having a relationship with his mama.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. It's psychological.
Yeah. It is, and it's horrendous, right?
It's evil.
A lot of it stems from this one man doctrine, right? It's taken just to the extreme that it can be, and it's evil. So let's jump down to the bottom one, right? Because the other one is where everyone's going to want to listen. So we're going to make everyone wait till the third one where we talk about polygamy, right? Um, Warren Jeffs
Just
is a
say he
racist.
was a racist.
He is a racist.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to decide if I want to use how I want to go about saying it, but there's just no better way to say it. He's a racist.
Explicit thing. You can leave
Right.
off SOB. Racist.
Yeah. He so did you while I'm kind of laying out some stuff, make sure you read those two little pictures that I threw in there if you haven't read them yet. So Jeff's, when he was actively teaching, was actively teaching that all races that were not white, but particularly the black race, is inferior, right? It's a lower class. Teaching that they were filthy, immoral people, right? That they're just evil, right? Just by being different, right, makes them evil. One of the things that he said that really irks me, right? Because one, it's just bad exegesis, but
And
he said
he's not unique in this.
he is not unique in this, right? If you remember, right, the CSA had very similar teachings that came from the KKK. But so he said at one point it was necessary that the devil should have a representation on earth as well as God. One, that's never necessary. That's again bad exegesis. So Ham's wife, right? If you remember, Ham was Noah's son, was preserved on the ark So Ham's wife that was preserved on the ark was a Negro of the seed of Cain, and there was a priestly purpose in it that the devil would have a representation as well as God. I wish that I could tell you where he gets that idea from. Right? I I should have done better this week. I could have made time to read through the Book of Mormon and figure out where he finds that in the Book of Mormon because it's not in the Bible anywhere. But
I've not read the Book of Mormon, so I don't want to say yet. When we get to that, we'll talk more about it.
Right. Well, it's not. You're right. I probably shouldn't say that's where it is, but it's not in the Bible, right? But he says that it's in scriptures, right? And they consider the Book of Mormon
a
part of their
concept I've
scriptures.
heard before.
So it is. Like we said, it came up in the CSA discussion, CSA being the white supremacist, far extremist right group in North Arkansas. Go back and listen to that episode. It's on our podcast. So he also went on to say that no one who mingles their blood with that of the seed of Cain could attain the rights and blessings conferred by the prophet, right, as far as salvation, exaltation, godhood, etc. So, racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it always these hillbilly inbred that are so
Right.
racist? Because we'll mention the inbred. Dave's marrying cousins and stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
Not to mention Warren Jeff's daughters and some of his sons, maybe. Definitely his nephews.
Right.
Because he was in a little. Every time they're racist as well.
It is.
What in the world? Well, actually, I know what in the world. Evil is evil.
Evil is evil.
It progresses in similar ways. When he talks about Lucifer, such evil does exist. Satan exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny how the same things get used over and over again. We see this in similar concepts and things. It's not that they're conferring together, but there's some spiritual warfare happening.
Right.
When we use the words, what do we use now? Fake news. There's a lot of fake news being put out there in the spiritual realms. Right there. And that's what this whole cult is, a perversion of the truth. They had the truth, and then they've just perverted it more and more and more. What was you thinking about the fake news?
Well, I'm just wondering if they ever actually had the truth.
Well, their Bible does include. They just added to it.
Yeah, but they added to it, and then they read things out of it that's not right.
Yeah.
So
their translation is a little different. They have some. They changed some of the scriptures. Adding. That's my point. Had access to the truth, but he chose to corrupt it, and it's just gotten more corrupt. Now, the LDS made some changes. Again, I try not to cover them at the same.
Right.
But they made some changes that made them more susceptible to American society. And they dropped some of these things. I don't know if they had this thing. I suspect when we go into that, we'll find that they did, though.
Yes, they did. No. Right. So those other things that I posted just above that section, right? It's recorded Jeff's words, and he's quoting some things from Brigham Young, right? So the second president of the LDS, right? So there's at least some idea that the seed of Cain was the black race, right? At least as far back as Brigham Young. And if Brigham Young taught it, then Joseph Smith probably taught it as well.
Wait. There's another fallacy. So if that was from Cain, which we know, what about the whole story of Noah?
What about it?
Well, didn't everybody die?
Right, but Ham's wife is considered to remember if you go back and remember the devil needed representation on earth, so Ham's wife that was preserved was of the black race. So that's how the devil's representation was preserved, because
This whole thing's
you got
weird.
it is, right? It's so broken, right? It sets up a duality, right? We can get into the issue there of dualism rather than Christ is king, right? Um,
Well, and that's
that's
exactly what they
placing
get to, right? Christ is
Mhm.
not king.
Right, right,
Christ was but a prophet, and more so, his teachings have been corrupted, and Joseph Smith was revealed. Again, it's
right,
almost impossible to cover that without talking about the LDS here.
right. Yep. Um, so I I don't think that Jeffs was calling for a race war like Charles Manson.
No, I don't think so
But
either. He was much creationist.
well, but he said this. Um, he, talking about Cain, killed his brother. The Lord put a mark on him, and there are some of his children in this room. When all the other children of Adam have had the privilege of receiving the priesthood and of coming into the kingdom of God, and of being redeemed from the four quarters of the earth, and have received their resurrection from the dead, then it will be time enough to remove the curse from Cain and his posterity. He deprived his brother of the privilege of pursuing his journey through life and of extending his kingdom by multiplying upon the earth. And because he did this, he is the last to share in the joys of the kingdom of God. So the very first time that I read that, my very first thought was, honestly, to use the newsworthy term, dog whistle. Right. The very first thing that I thought of was,
what does that mean?
The black people. That it's a message within the other message, right? Telling your people what to do without explicitly saying it, right?
Okay.
And the very first thing that I thought was, he's telling his people it's okay to kill black people. Reading it just now, right? I see that the words that he's using are saying, after the end, after resurrection, then the blackness will be removed from these people and they can be part of the kingdom.
I find it interesting that he mentioned there are some of his children in this room.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like you said, he led with fear. He was constantly condemning people. He
Always.
never was encouraging people. He was always condemning them.
Yep. Yep. So, I'm on the fence there as to what he was saying, but who knows? He was quite the racist. So
an interesting thing is that they never
is
love bombing. That's a common thing we see with a lot of cults, because they weren't really recruiting, right?
Right.
So they did have some people join them from the LDS. They didn't really consider that recruiting. But for the most part, they weren't recruiting, and they weren't doing love bombing. Oh, we're going to love into this. It was very much.
Mm-hmm.
And this right here, he was calling out and saying black people were a lower class, basically.
Yep. Yep. And in the same thing, turning around and saying, "There's some of you in this room," right?
Yeah.
It's just he was berating people and beating them down to make them submit to him, because that makes sense. Authority is not taken, it is given. But
power can be taken, though. He was authority.
True.
He was claiming power.
True.
So
yep.
So
he uses the word power a lot in this book.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but let's go to our third segment here.
Our third segment the belief in the principle of plural marriage, polygamy,
They also call that celestial marriage, right?
celestial marriage. Yep. So
There's a
when are you
reason for
getting your
that,
second
because
wife,
it's
Matt?
me. Have you
Yeah,
met my first wife?
I have.
Then you know well that she would be planning my funeral,
No,
bring
she
another woman
wouldn't.
home.
She would not plan a
Uh,
funeral for you. You'd
oh,
be out in the bottom of the lake.
she'd give me a nice funeral. She's pretty bold. Joke she would cut
That's
me.
true. That's true.
I
She is pretty
always tell
bold.
people,
She would.
look, she.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Gotta love her.
but are you signing up? I think y'all don't do that in the
Oh no.
Orthodox circles.
No. Oh goodness, no. No. We're no.
Here's
Most
the
of
thing.
us are like, we don't even need the first wife.
I definitely need my wife.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I know that wasn't exactly.
Right.
But here's the thing. I jokingly am like, I don't know if I could handle another woman. But honestly, like I've read some of these books of some of these plural marriage things, and this goes back to Manson about the giving up ego. A lot of his girls had trouble competing with the other girls for him. It's the same thing with these plural wives. All the book articles and the stories I've read about, a lot of them have come from the wives, because there's a lot of women that have left, either his wives or other men, and they all talked about struggling with sharing their husbands. It's a big deal. There's a popular TV show, I don't remember the name of it, about polygamists. They're nominally Mormon, but they're not FLDS.
Yep.
Yeah, and they've all basically, because of struggling with each other and it's not made to be that way. Now I realize there was multiple wives in the. We gotta realize that was part of the Jewish ways.
Yep.
But I don't think that's the right. I don't see any good argument for that. Solomon had a whole bunch of wives, but remember, Solomon was blessed, but he squandered those blessings. The wives was, led him to sin, as a matter of fact. Not that it was their fault; it was 100% his fault. He just gave in. The plural marriage thing is crazy, but they call it celestial marriage, plural marriage, because legally not. So they legally have one wife, so they celestial marriage. Just in the church, they marry the others, which is fine. You are not legally allowed to go to the government and marry multiple women, but you can marry multiple women into your house, even if you're not legally married.
Yep.
Now, they take advantage of this, and we'll talk about this more in the social issues.
Right.
Very common for the government assistance and food stamps. Originally, Warren's family did. It was a big source of pride. The prophet's family doesn't do this. But after they lost a whole bunch of it and lost it in lawsuits and stuff, he made them go sign up for food stamps and things. And they weren't signing up and saying, oh, we're a family with one husband, 7 wives.
Right. Oh, no.
To single mamas, because legally they were single mamas.
They were single mamas. Yep. Yep.
And so our tax dollars were so far.
They call it bleeding the beast.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting.
That was it. Yep. I almost wrote it in here, and I was like, that fits more with the social issues. But yep.
More about that. So tell us more about this plural marriage thing.
Yeah. So it really stems from section 132 of the Doctrines and Covenants from the LDS, right? Joseph Smith. Again, it's impossible.
The very first prophet, the man who started the LDS, the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints.
Yep. It was revealed to him, right, that marriage was such an important piece of eternity, right? That if you were married, right? I didn't write all of the notes down. I should have, but if you were married, but not married by the appointing and approval of the prophet, right? If and when you died, you were not married in heaven, and therefore could not be God's, right? You were limited to the class of. Oh, did I? Okay, you were limited to the class of angels, right? You then became an angel, uh, and served the others that became gods.
So that's
Okay.
something that you haven't brought up. I know it's more of an LDS thing, but so their thing, we believe you die and go to heaven, but we're still humans.
Mm-hmm.
Believe that you die and you are a god. You're just here on earth. God is the God we worship. I don't know what they call him, the something God, but he's never taken a human body. But they believe that people become gods, right?
You're hurting my head.
Okay.
how okay. Again, there's just so much contradiction and breaking, right? Because God specifically did take a human body. His name is Jesus. And they even
Right, but
say
they
that Jesus is God. So how do you make that idea mesh without a bunch of
but this idea that you die become a god, basically,
right?
that's a big breaking thing because Christianity become a god. This is one of the central things.
It kind of at times there's there is teaching, right, that theosis, right, which is salvation, um, is to become by grace what God is by nature, or what Christ is by nature, right? To become one and partakers of the divine nature of God, which is in First Peter.
Partakers of nature is not becoming a god.
It's not becoming a God, right?
So
So it is
becoming
kind of
a
that.
god, and it's
You
not
don't become
like
a different God, right, of a different planet that spawns your own Earth.
well, and this is where there's a difference between the LDS, the Mormons, and Christianity. They
Mm-hmm.
say they're a Christian denomination, but this is one different that it makes them
Right,
not a Christian denomination. Christians don't view them as a Christian denomination because the basic theology is they're
right.
using some of the same names, but the base
They
theology is
right. Yep. They use the name
it's not a
Jesus, but
difference
they're
in
not talking about the same Jesus.
right. It's not a difference in sprinkling or dunking here.
Right.
Baptizing the Holy Spirit, it's a
Right.
major difference. So it's important to know that because they're literally talking about, oh, I get to become a god. Well, that's a pretty big deal,
Mm-hmm.
right? So salvation, but we're talking about a man, so he would become an angel, which would be a servant to God, not a.
Right. Right.
So must have be married there. Now, you didn't mention anything about the number of wives here.
So six. Well, 132 does eventually get into the number of wives down in 61 and 62. Um, but so if a man and a woman are not married, appointed, and approved by the prophet, their marriage is null and void at death, right? And so that's a big deal, right? So you have to go to the prophet, right? Again, coming back to the prophet is the one in charge. You have to have his blessing. You have to do it his way or no way, right? Um, and so this Doctrines and Covenants section 132 goes on to talk about Abraham, right? If you remember, Abraham did have multiple wives, um, and that the promise of innumerable descendants is yours also, right? It's Christ talking to Joseph Smith. Is yours also because you are of Abraham, and the promise was made to Abraham. So he's making that connection already to you have to have lots of descendants, but to have lots and lots of descendants as innumerable as the sand, you're going to have multiple wives, right? There's just not a very logical way to make that happen without doing so. And then in 61, right, he goes on and he says, if any man espouses a virgin and desires to espouse another, and the first gives her consent, right? So very early on, there was that idea that the first had to approve it. Wasn't the case later, but it was at the beginning. Um, and if he espoused the second, and they are virgins, and have vowed to no other man, then he is justified. So just before this, he's talking about adultery and what counts and doesn't count as adultery, because Matthew chapter 5 wasn't enough, right? It has to have more detail. Um, then he is justified. He cannot commit adultery, for they are given to him, right? Um, for he cannot commit adultery with that belongs unto him, and to no one else. And if he has 10 virgins given to him by this law, he cannot commit adultery, for they belong to him, and they are given unto him, therefore he is justified. Right? So
yeah, so they're saying it's not adultery to marry multiple women.
it's not adultery. And so all of this marriage, right? The more marriage, the better, right? You've got your higher standing, your
Well, the higher the number, the better. But there was
Mhm.
also a minimum number. So in the FLDS, the minimum number was 3.
Mhm.
You did not qualify for salvation unless you had 3 wives. The wives attain salvation through their husbands.
For their husbands. Okay.
As a young woman, you get your salvation through your father, but you're to be married, you get your salvation through your husband. If you were single, then you cannot attain salvation.
Right.
So they believe they have to be, and then the prophet is body, and then what prophet is the one who makes the decision. So another story right here. There was a man who was he had joined somebody who had joined and had one wife, learned more and more about it. He was LDS and then joined about it. His first wife was not really, she was okay with it, and he got a second wife given to him.
Okay. Which is Warren Jeff's father. Yep.
Yes, who was the prophet before him. Then he wanted a third wife because to obtain salvation. And he had several girls. And he denied, but his daughter says this is what happened, and they have recordings showing this is what happened that they played on the Dr. Phil show. He basically traded his daughters, 2 of his daughters. And that's the term they use, turned them in. He turned them in to be married to the prophet. And the prophet at the time was Rulon. And actually, it was the time Warren was actually running things and making the decisions at that time. And daughters ended up becoming Rulon's wives, who eventually became Warren's wife. One of them decided she would not be Warren. Whenever Warren would take all the wives, she left. She's the one wife who left. She refused to be married to him. He told her to own her, and she said no. But basically, her father traded her so that Rulon, or in this case, actually, it was really Warren, so the prophet would give him his third wife. So he could attain salvation. So he literally, girl. She was 18 at the time, but he was treating her as property. That's basically a child property to me.
Yep, which is something we'll talk about next week. The treatment of women and children, and they are very much property.
They're no different. 62 there, the belongeth unto him.
Yep.
Yeah. My wife don't belong to me.
No. Yep. For them, it's no different than passing a book around. It's just a piece of property.
Well, which he also did. So Warren Jeffs has been known to take one person's wife, which he took that wife and assigned it to someone else. He's been known to take, you're out, you're disfellowship. That's the other thing. He actively would take any strong people out of the group and disfellowship them and send them out and cast them out so that it's very common for him to do that to this day.
Yep.
His son was sent out.
Yeah.
Who else used to do that? Saddam Hussein.
Yep.
Saddam Hussein came to power. Hunkel came to power, and just like some other relatives of his, he was a security officer and killed off the person that was in charge.
Yep. Kim Jong-il did it. Kim Jong-un does it. Putin does it. Right? It's just, it is part of, bless you, it is part of dictatorship, right? It is just
evil
101. Yep.
So cool. Well, listen, I think that about wraps up the basic teachings. I know we've skipped over some things. You're going to cover some more stuff in the blog post about this episode, aren't you?
I will try to, yes.
Well, I'm not saying you got to write a lot, but you already wrote some notes and some other things such
Right.
as their views on nature of God and afterlife. And
Hmm.
if you could just put this outline in there, that would be very good information.
Right. Yep. Yep. And we'll definitely be talking about that and the Book of Mormon and the other Pearl of Great Price and Doctrines and Covenants as we talk more about other FLDS type groups and the LDS themselves. So
There's so
there
much
is
here.
there's a wealth of I'd say a wealth. There's a treasure trove for us to dig through and make lots of episodes on. So it's great.
All
Keeps us
right.
busy
Well,
for a
listen,
while.
y'all. Thanks, y'all, for being with us this week. We'll return next episode, and we're going to talk about the social issues.
We'll see you then.